In the shadows of history lie corridors no map dares to show, sealed doors, locked vaults, and voices that once spoke in code across the static of war. What was buried was never meant to be unearthed. Lost divisions, vanished convoys, transmissions, cut short with a final breath. Each fragment whispers of power and betrayal, a record erased, yet refusing to die. Tonight, we descend into the silence between archives, where truth hides in the dark. In the winter of 1944, with the Eastern Front pressing hard against German defences, the Allied command in London authorised a discreet transfer of material to the Soviet Union under the guise of a supply convoy. The programme, classified under the innocuous title Operation Dove, was routed through Liverpool, intended to reach Murmansk by way of the treacherous Barents Sea. Convoy PQ-17 had already gone down in history for its disastrous losses in 1942, yet this mission was even more closely guarded, shrouded in secrecy because of its cargo: prototype radar assemblies, coded fuel additives for high-altitude Soviet bombers, and portable cryptographic equipment designed to coordinate future offensives with the Red Army. The official manifest, later uncovered in the Admiralty's Blue Folder series, lists 8 freighters and 2 escort destroyers departing Liverpool on 12th of March 1944. Admiralty tracking signals show the convoy left Scapa, flow by night, joined briefly by Norwegian corvettes before moving north into heavy weather. On 15th of March, radio contact from the lead freighter, SS Hatherley, reported deteriorating conditions and ice buildup on decks. That was the last recorded signal from the convoy. By 19th March, Soviet Naval Command reported that only 2 ships, SS Mallory and MV Lauriston, arrived in Murmansk. The remaining 6 freighters, along with their escorts, had vanished without trace. At the time, the Admiralty issued a terse communiqué. Enemy submarine activity presumed responsible for losses in northern sector. This explanation was plausible. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm was still operating from bases in Trondheim and Narvik, despite the heavy Allied bombing campaign. Yet when Allied signals intelligence from Bletchley Park was reviewed decades later, decrypted Enigma intercepts contained no mention of an engagement with a convoy in the Barents Sea during that week. Nor do Kriegsmarine war diaries, meticulously maintained and preserved in the Bundesarchiv, show any confirmed sinkings in that area. The supposed U-boat attack was a fabrication. The mystery might have ended there had it not been for a Luftwaffe reconnaissance photograph discovered in 1979 among unprocessed aerial negatives at the Imperial War Museum in London. The image, dated 24th March 1944, captured the northern fjords of Norway. In the photograph, the wreckage of 3 Allied hulls is clearly visible, not sunk, but anchored close to shore near the port of Hammerfest. Kriegsmarine trawlers can be seen patrolling the waters. The implication was staggering. The ships had not been destroyed at sea, but diverted, captured intact, and concealed. How such a diversion could have occurred is the subject of ongoing debate among historians and intelligence analysts. One fragment of evidence lies in an altered weather report issued on 14th of March 1944 by the Admiralty's North Atlantic Meteorological Office. The report, directing the convoy to change course to avoid a phantom storm system, was later found to have been tampered with. The changes were traced back to a cipher clerk in Scapa Flow who was quietly court-martialed after the war under charges never made public. His service file, sealed until 2025, contains references to compromised communications and possible enemy penetration. The suspicion is that German intelligence, possibly through the Abwehr or infiltrated networks in Britain, had managed to alter official routing orders, steering the convoy into a trap. Soviet records further complicate the narrative. Declassified NKVD files from the early Cold War reveal frustration among Soviet naval officers who believed the British had intentionally withheld critical cargo. In a letter from Admiral Ivan Isakov to Stalin, dated May 1944, the missing materials are described as components of utmost importance to radar and jet propulsion experiments. Stalin himself reportedly suspected sabotage by Western allies, who wished to delay Soviet technological advances. The tone of the letter suggests that the Soviets did not believe the official story of U-boat attacks either. The fate of the crews remains equally obscure. No bodies were recovered. No prisoner of war lists contain their names. Yet in 1952, a Norwegian fisherman gave testimony to local police in Tromsø, claiming that in the final months of the war, he had seen Allied prisoners marched under SS guard near the Hammerfest harbour. He described their uniforms as Royal Navy blues, salt-stained and worn. His report was ignored at the time, dismissed as rumour in the chaotic aftermath of occupation. Only decades later, when cross-referenced with the missing crews of Operation Dove, did the account gain chilling significance. Some researchers argue that the entire operation was less a supply mission and more a covert transfer of experimental technology. The so-called fuel additives listed in the manifest may have been linked to British research into high-compression aviation fuels and early jet propulsion. German interest in such materials would have been immense, particularly for the Luftwaffe's Me-262 program. If the convoy was indeed steered into capture, the technology could have been appropriated by the Reich in its final desperate months. Certain Luftwaffe technical reports from late 1944 do reference foreign-sourced additives tested in jet engines, though without clear attribution. The British government has consistently maintained that the losses were due to ordinary hazards of Arctic navigation and enemy activity, yet the absence of wreck sites, the silence of German naval records, and the existence of that Luftwaffe reconnaissance photo undermine the official narrative. When a Freedom of Information request was filed in 2001 regarding Operation Dove, the Ministry of Defense released only heavily redacted documents. Sections referring to technical equipment and inter-service communications irregularities remain blacked out. The file closes with a stark note. Subject remains sensitive to NATO partners. No further disclosures. Today, maritime archaeologists continue to search the Norwegian coast for evidence of the missing ships. Side-scan sonar surveys off Hammerfest have revealed anomalies consistent with scuttled hulls lying in shallow waters, though Norwegian authorities have been reluctant to authorize full excavation, citing environmental hazards and unexploded ordnance. Survivors' families, now dwindling with age, still petition for recognition, convinced their relatives did not die in combat, but were silenced in a larger intelligence war. The story of Operation Dove remains a ghost in the historical record, too documented to be dismissed, yet too fragmented to be resolved. Whether it was an act of betrayal, a catastrophic intelligence compromise, or a deliberate diversion to conceal secret cargo, its absence from official history speaks volumes. 6 ships, 2 destroyers, hundreds of men, and an unknown payload simply disappeared into the northern darkness, leaving behind only doctored logs, erased transmissions, and a single photograph no one was meant to see. On 11 April 1945, when units of the US 6th Armored Division entered the gates of Buchenwald concentration camp near Weimar, they encountered scenes of unimaginable suffering. Survivors were skeletal, crematoria still smoldered, and German guards had fled or been killed by prisoners during the chaotic hours before liberation. But amid the testimonies and photographic evidence that defined the camp in the public record, a far more obscure discovery was made by engineers of the US Signal Corps attached to the liberating forces. Anomalous radio transmissions emanating from within the camp itself. The official after-action report, archived in Record Group 338 at the US National Archives, mentions unauthorized shortwave signals on frequency 43.26 MHz, narrowband transmission, continuing after German evacuation. These signals were first detected on 8 April, 3 days before liberation, during routine monitoring of Luftwaffe night fighter frequencies. Operators at a forward listening station in Eisenach had assumed the traffic was a stray German broadcast. However, the use of call signs not associated with known Luftwaffe squadrons raised suspicion. The broadcasts continued intermittently, always at night, with coded phrases repeated in a format resembling one-time pad encryption. According to the report of Captain Howard Levens, Signal Corps detachment officer, Triangulation placed the source within the perimeter of Buchenwald itself, specifically near the camp's power station and underground workshops. Levin's notes, preserved only in carbon copies, describe a series of rhythmic bursts, possibly teleprinter in origin, suggesting the use of advanced German cipher machinery. More troubling, one decrypted fragment referred to Morgenrot Phase 2 complete, transfer ready. The term Morgenrot, Red Dawn, was not found in any Allied order of battle or intelligence registry at the time. The existence of clandestine workshops at Buchenwald is corroborated by survivor testimony. In post-war interviews conducted by the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, former inmates described being forced to construct electrical components, radar assemblies, and experimental power relays under SS supervision. The camp's subterranean Dora annex, linked to the Mittelbau Dora facilities at Nordhausen, had been used for V-2 rocket assembly. Yet the Buchenwald workshops were smaller, more secretive, and directly overseen by engineers in civilian clothes, believed to be from the Reichspostministerium's research division. Survivors recalled a project involving large banks of capacitors and unusual antenna arrays, though none could explain its purpose. Immediately after liberation, Signal Corps personnel attempted to locate the transmission equipment. They discovered a concealed room beneath the camp power plant containing dismantled racks of radio apparatus, reels of copper wiring, and batteries still warm to the touch. 2 crates marked with the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA insignia, held fragments of paper covered in 5-digit cipher groups. Before analysis could be completed, Soviet liaison officers arrived and demanded joint custody of the materials, citing inter-Allied agreements on captured communications. Within a week, the equipment was removed by Red Army trucks and shipped east. The Americans retained only photographs and fragmentary notes. The controversy deepened decades later when a series of files were declassified in Moscow during the brief Glasnost period of the late 1980s. NKVD records mention Project Morgenrot as a radio relay system using camps in central Germany as transmission nodes. According to these files, the system was designed not for communication with German units, but as part of a covert intelligence exchange with stations operating in neutral Sweden. The implication was that Buchenwald, a site of mass suffering, had simultaneously been used as a hub for hidden negotiations and data transfers, bypassing conventional military channels. Skeptics argue that the Americans misinterpreted routine German traffic and that Soviet claims of relay systems were Cold War disinformation. Yet the anomalies remain difficult to dismiss. Decrypted fragments recovered by US codebreakers in 1946, now preserved in the NSA's Eisenach file, contain repeated references to Transport 77 and archive relocation. These match German records of convoys departing Weimar in early April, carrying sealed containers under SS guard. The cargo was never recovered. One survivor, a Czech electrical engineer named Pavel Horak, testified in 1961 to a West German court that he had been forced to construct strange cabinets with rotating drums and light-emitting tubes in Buchenwald's underground hall. His description matches early prototypes of Lorenz cipher machines, modified with cathode ray displays. Technology far beyond what was publicly known in 1945. Horak claimed that prisoners who worked on these devices disappeared, suddenly taken away in trucks at night. His testimony was dismissed at trial as unreliable. The fate of the transmissions themselves remains unresolved. Monitoring reports show the final broadcast from the Buchenwald frequency occurred at 0412 hours on 11th April 1945, just hours before US troops reached the gates. The last words intercepted, before the signal cut abruptly, were translated as, "Phase complete. Await silence." To this day, historians debate whether this referred to the evacuation of equipment, the liquidation of evidence, or the conclusion of a clandestine project. In the years after the war, rumors spread within Allied intelligence circles that elements of the SS, facing imminent defeat, used such covert channels to negotiate terms with neutral powers, or even with select Allied Officers. No proof has surfaced, but the persistence of the Morgenrot fragments in both US and Soviet archives suggests that whatever occurred was considered too sensitive for public disclosure. By the early 1950s, as the Cold War hardened, both Washington and Moscow ceased mention of Buchenwald transmissions altogether. Files were sealed, signals reports destroyed, and survivor accounts marginalized. The narrative of Buchenwald as a site of liberation and horror remained dominant, yet beneath that surface lies a hidden layer of clandestine technology, encrypted voices in the night, and unanswered questions about who the SS was speaking to in the camp's final days. Today, in the archives of Weimar and Washington, fragments of intercepted traffic remain. Faded teletype sheets show coded bursts captured by tired operators in Eisenach, men who had no idea they were recording what may have been the last whispers of a secret war behind the war. The voices from Buchenwald fell silent in April 1945, but the signals they carried, half decrypted, half erased, continue to echo in the classified margins of history. A reminder that liberation often uncovered not just atrocities, but also buried layers of conspiracy and silence. In February 1945, the Soviet High Command launched its massive Vistula Oder offensive, pushing German forces back with overwhelming manpower and firepower. By the second week of the month, Marshal Zhukov's First Belarusian Front had crossed the Oder River, establishing bridgeheads only 60 kilometers from Berlin. German resistance was expected to collapse. Yet buried in Soviet archives are accounts of an inexplicable engagement. The sudden appearance of a Waffen-SS armored formation not listed in any German order of battle, a so-called 32nd Schatten, division that struck with uncanny effectiveness before vanishing without trace. The incident is recorded in the combat diary of the Soviet 11th Guards Tank Corps, housed today in the Central Archive of the Russian Ministry of Defense, TSAMO. On the 17th of February 1945, elements of the 44th Guards Tank Brigade advanced toward the town of Kustrin. At 0240 hours, under heavy fog, forward T-34-85s reported being ambushed by Panther tanks firing at extreme accuracy from concealed positions. Survivors recalled beams of light or faint glows emanating from the German vehicles, later described as projectors mounted on their turrets. Within the first 2 hours of fighting, the 44th Guards lost 32 tanks, an unusually high rate given Soviet numerical superiority. Prisoner interrogation reports, translated in 1946 by the US Army's Historical Division, contain testimony from captured Soviet crews who insisted the Panthers were equipped with night vision sights, enabling them to engage targets in complete darkness. At the time, such technology was virtually unknown outside a handful of experimental programs. Post-war research later confirmed that the Wehrmacht had indeed fielded the FG-1250 Dawn infrared system in limited numbers for Panther tanks, but never on the scale described near Kustrin. Soviet accounts refer to an entire regiment, possibly more, equipped with this capability. The name 32nd Schatten Division first appears in a fragmentary German document recovered in March 1945 near Frankfurt an der Oder, a field order issued to Div Schatten, SS Pers Regten 7. Yet no records in the Bundesarchiv, nor post-war interviews with former Waffen-SS officers acknowledge the unit's existence. Historians have speculated that Schatten, meaning shadow, was not a formal designation, but an internal codename used by SS Command for an improvised battle group. Still, Soviet records describe uniforms bearing division insignia not identifiable with known formations. The most chilling detail lies in the aftermath. By 19th February, after 3 nights of intense fighting, the Ghost Division disappeared. Reconnaissance flights found only burned-out Panther hulls, many of which bore serial numbers linked not to Panzer production lines, but to civilian tractor factories in Silesia. The markings appeared deliberately falsified, as if to obscure their origin. No survivors were captured, no officers identified. Soviet counterintelligence, SMERSH, launched an inquiry, but concluded only that enemy forces with experimental equipment conducted diversionary attack, subsequently withdrawn to unknown sector. The Americans also took notice. A report filed in 1946 by the US Office of Naval Intelligence, declassified in the 1990s, references Shatton Division as a possible testbed for advanced optical targeting. The report cites field photographs, never released publicly, showing German tanks with infrared searchlights mounted above the gun mantlet, devices strikingly similar to Allied prototypes developed a decade later. One annotation reads, "Technology, acquisition priority, possible transfer to Soviet custody post-war." If true, this would explain why Moscow suppressed the episode in its official histories. Survivor testimony from Soviet tank crews is consistent yet unsettling. In interviews conducted in the 1960s, veterans described a battlefield unlike any they had encountered. Panthers opening fire at night without illumination, shells striking with surgical precision, and German infantry carrying odd rifle attachments that emitted faint glows, likely infrared STG-44 vampire systems, known to have existed in prototype form. "They saw us before we saw them," recalled one lieutenant. "It was as if the darkness belonged to them." The psychological impact on Soviet forces was profound. Unit morale reports filed by political commissars noted widespread fear of a phantom enemy. Some tankers refused to advance at night, convinced they were being hunted by machines invisible in the dark. This fear persisted even after the division vanished, a ghost on the Oder front. Speculation has swirled ever since. Some argue the division was a desperate experiment by the Waffen-SS, deploying every remaining prototype system in a last gamble to delay the Soviets. Others believe the engagement was deliberately erased from German records, either to protect post-war technological transfers or to conceal the involvement of foreign scientists. One British intelligence file from 1947, still partially redacted, refers to Shatton material and Soviet acquisition through capture of undamaged units, suggesting at least some vehicles were seized intact. The story took a darker turn during the Cold War. In 1956, NATO analysts reviewing captured German documents flagged repeated references to Kampfgruppe Nachtjäger operating near Küstrin, possibly identical to the Shatton Division. The same analysts noted that Soviet armored tactics in the late 1940s began to incorporate concepts of night fighting equipment well before the West. Some concluded, quietly, that the Soviets had absorbed captured German systems directly from this mysterious division. Yet the truth remains elusive. No official German record acknowledges the existence of the 32nd Shatton Division. Soviet histories omit the engagement entirely. Western archives contain only fragments, heavily censored. What is left are battlefield diaries, whispered testimonies, and a handful of blurred photographs showing Panther silhouettes glowing faintly in the night. To the veterans of the 11th Guards Tank Corps, the memory has never faded. In their private writings, they speak of an enemy that appeared from nowhere, struck with precision, and dissolved into shadow. An enemy that bore no official designation, left no prisoners, and seemed to fight not for victory, but for delay. A ghost division on the Oder front, one final shadow of the Reich, vanishing as quickly as it appeared, leaving only questions in the darkness where history chose silence. By late 1942, the Allied command faced a dilemma. The North African campaign required massive logistical effort, and Axis ports across Sicily and southern Italy were funneling supplies to Rommel's Afrika Korps. Conventional bombing runs were costly and often ineffective against fortified harbors. In response, US naval intelligence quietly authorized an experimental mission. Operation Harpoon, a test deployment of American-built mini-submersibles designed to sabotage Axis port facilities. Official histories dismiss the program as a technical dead end, abandoned after a single trial. But fragmentary records, forgotten testimonies, and Italian police reports suggest a darker fate, one in which the mission did not simply fail, but vanished into secrecy. Planning documents trace the program's origins to summer 1942, when engineers at the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, working with British Special Operations Executive (SOE) advisors, constructed a handful of prototype submersibles modelled on British chariots, and Italian maiali human torpedoes. The US Navy designated them Harpoon craft, officially classified as underwater delivery vehicles. A memorandum from Rear Admiral Richard Edwards to Cummins, Commander-in-Chief US Fleet, on 22 September 1942, noted their potential use in sabotage of enemy oil depots, munitions piers, and coastal shipping. On 28 October 1942, as Operation Torch prepared to launch, 2 Harpoon craft were loaded aboard the submarine USS Shad, SS-235, off the coast of Algeria. One was later tested in shallow waters near Oran and deemed unstable. The second was selected for a live mission, infiltration of Palermo Harbour in Sicily, to attach demolition charges to fuel storage tanks supplying Axis convoys. The mission was scheduled for 6 November, just days before the Torch landings. Its crew, Lieutenant J.G. James Colby, and Chief Machinist's mate, Vincent Harland, both trained in covert diving operations at a secluded base in Key West. What happened next is obscured by silence. USS Shad's patrol log records launching the Harpoon craft at 23:14 hours 10 miles off Palermo. The mini-submersible, carrying Colby and Harland, disappeared into the night. The submarine waited until dawn, surfacing briefly in search pattern. No recall signal was ever received. By 0900 hours, Shad was ordered to withdraw under threat of Axis patrols. In official US Navy records, the entry concludes simply, craft and crew presumed lost due to malfunction. Colby and Harland were listed as training casualties, their names omitted from combat loss lists. But Italian sources tell a different story. Declassified Carabinieri files from Palermo, dated November 1942, report fishermen sighting a dark whale-shaped craft surfacing near Trapani several days after the supposed mission. Witnesses described 2 uniformed men on board, waving white cloths before German patrol boats intercepted and towed the craft toward shore. The report, forwarded to the prefect of Palermo, identifies the vessel as an American sabotage submarine of unknown type. No further documentation exists. The trail ends abruptly. Hints of a cover-up appear in British SOE files recovered decades later. A memorandum by Colonel Colin Gubbins, head of SOE, warns in December 1942 that American initiative Harpoon has been compromised. Intelligence risk unacceptable. Recommend termination. What precisely had been compromised is unclear. Some researchers suggest Colby and Harland were captured alive, interrogated by German intelligence, and possibly forced to disclose details of Allied landing timetables. Others argue the mission's true objective was not sabotage at all, but retrieval of sensitive documents from an Italian collaborator within Palermo. The lack of demolition reports in Axis records lends weight to this theory. The mystery deepened in 1951, when a debriefing transcript of a former Kriegsmarine officer, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Fiedler, surfaced in American custody. Fiedler claimed that in late 1942, German naval engineers inspected a strange American diving machine stored at La Spezia. He described it as smaller than a U-boat, equipped with unusual electric propulsion, and bearing non-German electrical relays. He further alleged that 2 prisoners associated with the craft were transferred to Berlin under SS guard. The fate of those prisoners, if they were indeed Colby and Harland, remains unrecorded. Some historians argue that Operation Harpoon was buried precisely because it intersected with the Allies' most sensitive political arrangements. If 2 American sailors were indeed captured alive and interrogated, their confessions might have compromised not just the Palermo mission, but aspects of Operation Torch itself. The US Navy's swift reclassification of their deaths as training losses suggests deliberate obfuscation. Families of both men received vague condolence letters, with no details of combat or mission. Colby's mother wrote repeatedly to the Navy Department demanding clarification. Her correspondence was filed under Section Confidential Not for Release. Technical files also raise questions. Surviving design blueprints for the Harpoon craft, held today in the Naval History and Heritage Command, show advanced battery systems and sealed propulsion units that would not be reintroduced until the 1950s in NATO's swimmer delivery vehicles. It is unclear how such forward-leaning technology was developed so early. Some suspect British or even captured Italian designs were reverse-engineered. If Axis forces acquired one intact, the intelligence implications would have been severe. By the Cold War, the story of Operation Harpoon had virtually vanished. Not until 1974 did naval historian John Alden uncover fragmentary references in submarine patrol reports. His attempts to publish were met with resistance from the Department of Defense, which insisted that Harpoon never advanced beyond testing phase. Yet Alden had already interviewed retired officers who swore they had seen operational deployment orders. One described the mission as the one we never spoke of because it didn't come back. In Palermo, local divers continue to tell stories of a strange wreck lying in shallow waters near Favignana, shaped unlike any U-boat or Italian vessel. Attempts to investigate have been blocked by Italian naval authorities citing ordnance contamination. Whether this wreck is the lost Harpoon craft remains speculative, but its rumored presence fuels suspicion that the submersible did not vanish at sea, as official records claim, but was captured, hidden, and possibly dismantled for study. The disappearance of Colby and Harland is emblematic of an entire shadow war that unfolded beneath the surface of World War II. Experimental weapons deployed hastily, intelligence missions cloaked as sabotage, and human lives written off as casualties, in files that would never be opened. In the sterile language of Navy reports, they remain presumed lost. But in the fragments of Carabinieri notes, in whispers of captured technology, and in the silence of families who never received bodies, Operation Harpoon lingers as a forgotten episode, an operation meant to pierce the Axis stronghold of Sicily, swallowed instead by secrecy and the sea. When Soviet forces entered Prague in early May 1945, they found a city caught between liberation and ruin. German troops were retreating in disarray, and the Czech resistance had risen in open revolt. Amid the chaos, Red Army engineers tasked with securing the capital discovered something extraordinary beneath Prague Castle. A sealed underground chamber, its entrance hidden behind a false masonry wall near the old royal stables. What lay inside would spark decades of speculation, suspicion, and silence. According to the Soviet Engineer Detachment's report, catalogued in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in Podolsk, the chamber contained rows of steel crates, each marked with the black insignia of the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. Several crates were stenciled with an unusual label: Röntgenakte, literally X-ray files. Others bore SS runes and serial numbers not found in any known inventory. Photographs taken by a Red Army war photographer and later leaked in the 1990s show uniform metal cylinders stacked in neat columns, alongside sealed film canisters and bundles of bound documents. Within days, NKVD operatives arrived and assumed control of the site. The entire cache was packed into trucks and driven east. Official Soviet records thereafter make no further mention of the materials. Czech witnesses, however, recalled more. In the immediate aftermath of the war, members of the Prague uprising claimed they had seen Red Army soldiers hauling not only crates, but also film reels labeled in both German and English. One account, preserved in the diary of resistance fighter Josef Havel, described reels bearing the title Besprechung Zürich, or Zurich Conference. According to Havel, local rumors suggested the footage showed Allied officers meeting secretly with SS officials during the war's final weeks, perhaps to negotiate the surrender of select German units. Havel's notes were confiscated when he was arrested by the communist regime in 1949. He died in prison 2 years later. Western intelligence became aware of the Prague Vault almost immediately. A 1946 OSS memorandum, later declassified by the CIA, references a large cache of RSHA materials removed from Prague Castle by Soviet forces, believed to include documentation of Axis scientific projects. The memorandum warns that Soviet possession of these records may accelerate their weapons development programs. A British Joint Intelligence Committee file from the same year goes further, stating bluntly, "The possibility exists that the Prague materials included details of German research into radiological weaponry, advanced power generation, and experimental optics." These assessments coincided with sudden Soviet advancements in nuclear and radar sciences in the late 1940s, fueling suspicion that the vault had provided more than just paper. The most disturbing element remains the designation Röntgenakte. Scholars have long debated its meaning. Some argue it referred to X-ray imaging of Nazi medical experiments, perhaps linked to the atrocities committed at Dachau and Auschwitz. Others believe it denoted classified research into radiological weapons, an area known to have been explored in secret by the Reich's Uranverein, Uranium Club. One Soviet scientist, defecting in 1956, alleged that the Prague cache included photographic plates of uranium lattice experiments, though his testimony was dismissed as propaganda. No physical evidence has ever surfaced to confirm or refute these claims. Compounding the mystery, Czech archivists uncovered fragments of German correspondence in the 1960s during renovations near Hradčany Square. One letter, dated March 1945 and signed by SS General Hans Kammler, ordered that sensitive materials from Thuringia and Silesia be secured in the castle vault until further instructions. Kammler, who oversaw secret weapons programs including the V-2 rocket and underground jet fighter factories, disappeared in May 1945 under circumstances still debated. If his orders placed the cache in Prague, it may have been intended as a final repository for the Reich's most sensitive files, never meant for Allied eyes. Throughout the Cold War, Prague Castle remained under heavy surveillance by the Czechoslovak State Security (STB). Western diplomats visiting the castle were carefully restricted from accessing certain lower chambers. A declassified 1968 CIA cable, written during the Prague Spring, noted rumors among local officials of sealed tunnels bricked by Soviets in '45, still off limits to Czech authorities. After the Warsaw Pact invasion crushed the reform movement, such whispers vanished. The vault's possible connection to suppressed war crimes has only deepened the intrigue. In 1992, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Czech investigators gained temporary access to surviving KGB files in Moscow. Among them was a single page referencing Prague materials, negotiation films. The brief notation stamped "Top Secret" was dated July 1945. Its existence suggests that at least part of the cache did indeed contain film footage, possibly documenting secret contacts between Allied and Axis representatives. If true, it would challenge the official narrative of unconditional surrender and raise unsettling questions about what deals, if any, were struck in Europe's dying days. Archaeological surveys of Prague Castle in the 2000s reignited interest. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies beneath the northern wing consistent with sealed chambers. The Czech government, citing structural risks, has so far refused to authorize excavation. Historians pushing for transparency argue that the anomalies align with the precise location of the vault described in Soviet combat reports. Local legend has already filled the void. Tour guides whisper of the chamber where the war still sleeps, an underground room where the last secrets of the Reich remain entombed. What is known with certainty is this. In May 1945, Soviet forces uncovered something beneath Prague Castle. They photographed it, catalogued it, and removed it under armed guard. Since then, references have been scattered across Soviet, American, and British archives, each pointing to a cache of immense significance, each veiled in layers of classification. Whether it contained medical atrocities, nuclear blueprints, or evidence of clandestine negotiations, its absence from the historical record speaks louder than its discovery. The vault beneath Prague Castle remains one of the Second World War's great unanswered riddles. It is not merely a question of lost files, but of the deliberate burial of history itself. Somewhere, in sealed Russian archives or bricked-up tunnels beneath the Hradčany, lies a cache that may yet redefine our understanding of the war's endgame. Until it surfaces, the Röntgenakte will continue to haunt the margins of history, a suppressed chapter, hidden in stone and silence, beneath the heart of Prague. The files close, the lights dim, yet the echoes remain. Scraps of paper, distorted signals, ghostly machines rusting in forgotten soil. What was silenced still waits, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the ruins of history. Perhaps these were only shadows, inventions of fear and secrecy. Or perhaps they are the foundations of a story too dangerous to tell. The question is not whether the past speaks, but whether we dare to listen when it does.